Good afternoon. My name is Charlie Hank, and I'm a member of the Historical Committee. And today we're here to conduct a leadership recall of Presidential Member Richard A. Charles, who was the president of ASHRAE from 1992 to 1993. Good afternoon, Dick.
Hi there, Charlie.
Dick, I'd like to start off the interview by having you give us a little background about yourself.
Okay, well, I'm one of these fellows that grew up in this business. My father was a self-made man who came from England as a young boy, well, young man, I should say, 18. And he was one of those people that came on a ship to Ellis Island, and he as steerage. And so I've had a lot of fun going to Ellis Island and visualizing what these people went through. My father came here and he worked as a mechanic, a steam fitter, plumber. And when the work became hard, he decided he ought to go into another area, so he became a draftsman. He went to night school, and then he became a mechanical engineer. So from my early recollections of my childhood, I was involved in this business one way or the other. In fact, somebody asked me the other day, what was the first recollection you have of doing something in the engineering field? And I can remember that as a teenager, when I wanted some spending money, my father would show me a set of plans and a slide rule and tell me that if I made these calculations, that would be about the same amount. He would pay me about the amount of money that I needed for my little venture. And so I can remember doing that as a young person. And at the time I thought, you know, this is somewhat interesting, but really not something that maybe I wanted to do, because I wanted to be a photographer. Well, as time went on, I graduated from high school, and the Korean War started. So I said, well, what's my possibility of getting by? Well, it wasn't too good. So I ended up serving 4 years in the Air Force in photo recon. When I came out, I was married, and now what am I going to do? So during the time I was in, though, and after I got out, I was able to go back to college, not necessarily full-time, but on a part-time. I would take courses, and so I never did finish my college education. I'm one of those people that came from the School of Hard Knocks. And believe me, along the way, especially working in the engineering profession, it has been difficult. And so anybody that ever asks me what you recommend, I say, you get your education. I have 4 sons. They're all college graduates. None of them in this field. They've all had an opportunity to work in the business, but they never took my challenge. And my challenge was that if you're going to be the boss's son, you've got to be the best. You've got to be better than the rest. Otherwise, everybody will say the only reason you're here is because you're the boss's son. So they don't work for me. And that's fine. My real benefit from, well, by the way, I have 4 sons, and of course a good wife of 41 years, Van, and I have 5 grandchildren. And most of them live close by, except for my youngest son, who's a Marine pilot, and so he's off doing his flying right now.
That's good. How'd you get involved in ASHRAE?
As a young designer working in my dad's office, and by the way, my father was one of the first mechanical engineers licensed in the state of California. 1948, they had the Professional Licensing Act, and he was one of the, I think he was number 50. I was working for my dad, and a sales rep came in one day and asked me if I'd like to go to an ASHRAE meeting. Well, of course, you know, if you're working in this business, ASHRAE handbooks are our Bible. So I knew ASHRAE, but I'd never gone to a meeting before. So he took me. And when I was there, I was impressed with the fact that I met all these people who were involved in the same industry. I heard the names before, and now I saw their faces, because we had self-introductions and a nice chance to meet people, and then we had a technical session. And I thought, well, this is great. I mean, look at all this information they're giving out. And that really impressed me, was the sharing that people gave at these meetings. I don't care whether it was the speaker or whether it was an individual. And over the years, I found that to be true, that if I had a question or a problem, I could call one of my peers, one of my ASHRAE friends, and they would share with me on what they had done or what they would recommend. And that again impressed me with this great society.
So that was an early introduction into ASHRAE when you first got started working.
Right.
From that point, I guess you got involved in some chapter activities?
I did. You know, it's like anything else. If you get, our chapter was the Golden Gate chapter in San Francisco. And our policy there is if you come about maybe 5 or 6 times, you're on a committee. We'll put you on a committee before we even get you signed up, maybe. Now, that's not maybe the official way to do it, but that's the way we do it. And so I know I served on a lot of committees before I even became a full member, which I know is probably not the right thing to do, but that's what we did. And I got interested because of the technical information that I received from ASHRAE. We decided to put on seminars, and they were 6 weeks long, and we picked a series of subjects, and we had one night a week for 6 weeks, and I ran that for 3 years. And again, I found that it was so easy to get people to speak, and we always had a great turnout, and so that was my introduction to the committee work. Then I was on attendance and membership and research promotion. I don't know what we called it back then. Then eventually I went through the chairs, and I was the chapter president in 1975, 76.
Well, that's not good. Now, did you ever do any regional work?
Yes.
Regional offices?
I began as a energy management vice chairman for our region, and after 3 years I became the regional chairman and director for Region 10.
Mm-hmm. And then from there, well, of course, being a regional director, you're on the board.
And I had, I think, 1 year hiatus, and then I was elected to vice president, which I served for 2 years, and then treasurer and president-elect, and then president in 92, 93.
That's very good. During your term as president of ASHRAE, what was happening in the world at that time?
As I look back in the world, I don't remember the world events as much as I remember what was happening that affected us in ASHRAE.
Okay.
And I think the 3 things that I found that were very, the big concerns of every place I went was CFCs, energy conservation, and IAQ. And depending where you were, it would vary as to their importance maybe. But those 3 concerns were always mentioned as being their primary concerns.
What was society doing at that time to address these 3 issues?
Well, the society was very much involved with the CFC issue. We had written position papers, and we had done a lot of research on different refrigerants. And of course, we endorsed the Montreal Protocol, and we encouraged people. We had seminars, and we had different meetings in order to encourage people to plan on what they were going to do, how you were going to relate to this phase out. And so we were very involved in that.
And then as far as the energy management, what was going on then?
Well, energy, we had the opportunity to meet with DOE, Department of Energy. They were very concerned because they had already created the National Energy Act of '92, and one of the mandates was that all states have an energy conservation policy that would either meet or exceed standard 90.1, 89. And so ASHRAE was going to be the flagship You had to meet our standards. And yet it was a standard and not a code. And knowing that the states were going to have to create codes, we met with DOE and we proposed that Standard 90.1 be created into a code. And they agreed, thought it was wonderful that we would even consider creating a code, because they'd always been asking for codes, and we said, no, we're a standard organization. So they agreed to fund the efforts. It was done in Battelle Labs. And we created a what I call an Oversight Committee to watch this process, to make sure that the code work would not deviate from the standard. And our Oversight Committee did a great job. And we ended up with a document that is actually a code. Not only that, but we made the decision that other standards that are involved in issues that could be code related, that we would make them into codes as well. So 62 is it 89? And I guess it will be 55 something. Any of these standards that could be codes would be made into codes, which I thought was a great effort.
And I think 90.1 is being rewritten right now and will be written only in code language,
Right.
not in standard language at all anymore.
Right. So I think that, and then IAQ, of course, we all know that ASHRAE has been really working hard at the IAQ situation in having our IAQ meetings each year and incorporating as many of the medical people as we can into our ASHRAE committees on the, what is our committee that we have? Environmental Health, I think it's called. And so we're doing our part there. Along with the standard work, we're trying to promote the understanding among people, and of course we include a lot of programs in our meetings, and I think that we are doing a very good job.
What was the theme during your presidential year?
Well, if you haven't guessed, it was sharing resources globally. You know that I felt all my life that the sharing was a very important issue, and I have had the opportunity to travel all around the world before I became involved with ASHRAE as an officer by merely attending the different meetings and conferences that we had in various places. So as I went overseas, I was really impressed with the number of people that were ASHRAE members. I was even more impressed that they designed things and they did their work just the way we did our work. And I really understood very fast how important our handbooks were, our standards and everything else, that we had this commonality in our design processes.
That's good. Was there one person that had a great influence on you in ASHRAE? You mentioned the initial manufacturer representative who invited you initially to ASHRAE, but was there somebody else who had a big influence on your ASHRAE career?
I tried, when I read your questions prior to coming here, I thought, you're always looking back and you try to find somebody specific. And there were people that probably had more of an influence on me, maybe because I was more receptive to them. But I think that there were so many people, from the people that would just merely ask you if you would want to serve on a committee, right? I think that's really wonderful. The reason that we don't have more people serve is because they're not asked.
That's true.
People just assume that they're going to come up and say, hey, I want to be on this committee. It doesn't work that way. People don't feel that they have the ability or time or whatever reason, and so if you ask them, though, many times they'll say yes. So I start back with those people that invited me to participate. And then I think of, as I went up the line and people would say, would you like to do this, be the energy vice chairman? One of the persons that really impressed me was I had a man in our chapter who has been involved for a long time, Tom White. He's another sales representative. In fact, he was the more or less the office manager for a company, dealt with products. And he comes to all our meetings. I think he's probably 85, 86 years old. Still comes to the chapter meetings. Very interested in young people, trying to promote them along. He's always been there trying to encourage me to go the next step. You ought to do this, you ought to do that. And many times, you say, well, I can't do that, or I don't have that ability. Oh, no, come on, let's go, let's do it. And then I'll never forget the meeting in 1986 in San Francisco when I was at the Hilton Hotel, and President Bomfleth at that time came to me, and we were standing out on the rail looking over the city, and he said, did you ever think about becoming president of the society? And of course, the truth is that I had always had several goals in my life. One of them would be the ASHRAE president, fellow in the organization, PE, all these things. But when somebody asks you point blank, it more or less you say, oh, me? And my wife said when I was laying in bed wide awake that night, she says, what's the matter? And I said, well, and I told her the story, and she said, oh, no, you wouldn't even think about that, would you? But that started my thinking process, and that was back in 1985. And I think that people like that, who, I don't know what he saw in me, but the point was that he had enough faith in me to even consider asking me that question. I consider him to be a mentor. And it's been that way right along. People that you run into who will come up to you, and they'll see something in you that maybe you don't see, and encourage you to go the next step.
That's good. What would you say you would like to a new engineer starting out? And you mentioned earlier about inviting them and getting them involved, but what else would you say to a new engineer getting started in this field today?
Well,
words of advice.
I tell them all when they come into my office. I have been the president of my engineering firm for 37 years. And that happened because my father passed away all of a sudden, and I had the choice of taking this small engineering company and either trying to hang on to it or go into some other business. And by that time I decided this was a pretty good business. And after I was left holding the bag, so to speak, and all of the responsibility, I found out real fast what this business was all about. So when I remember those experiences and I see these new eager people come into our office, and they've been through school now and they're ready to go, and I tell them all the same story. I say this is one of the best professions that a person can work in today. Knowing what the opportunities are, knowing what the needs are, and if you are ready to pitch in and really, you've got to be willing to do more than just the basic norm, because anybody can just come and do a job. I have two Chinese designers working for me. They've been there over 30 years. They reached a plateau of what they wanted to do and never go beyond it. Now, they're very good at doing what they do, but they stopped growing. And if it wasn't now that they were ready, getting close to retirement, they would be out, because they have ignored the new technologies. I mean, we're pretty much CAD-oriented today, and they don't touch computers. So if I want to continue to use them, I have to have them do the layout and then somebody do it on CAD. And with today's market, very difficult. So I tell people that ASHRAE gives you more. Well, let's put it the other way. ASHRAE will give you whatever you put into it, and 10 times more. If you just want to be a bystander and come and go to the meetings and absorb, be the sponge, and let somebody else do the work, you're going to get just that much out of it. But if you get involved and you give back, you're going to get so much more from it. And I help them along, because I help sponsor, I pay the dues, and I pay the chapter meeting expenses. But only if you participate. If you don't participate and you want to just be an ASHRAE member, you pay it your own self. You're on your own.
That's good philosophy.
And I know we traveled to different regions as I was president, and I held what I called thank you breakfasts for the employers. We did a breakfast or a lunch, and we'd invite anywhere from 12 to 20 different people who had been sponsoring ASHRAE members, and just to thank them. But while they were there and we were thanking them, we were also asking them why. Why do you do it? And we got some very interesting responses. The common response was that we feel technical advancement is very important to our business. So any way that we can encourage people to continue to become technically advanced in whatever their field is, we want to support it. So we'll pay one membership to one society for each employee. One place I went, they told me that this man was this employer had the most participation from any employee in their chapter. I mean, his employees participated more than any other company. And so I thought, well, I want to hear what he has to say. So I said, what do you do for your people? He says, I don't pay their dues, I don't pay their chapter expenses, I don't do anything. I'm saying, come on. How come he has such participation? I go to every meeting, I'm on committees, I try to be a leader. And I agree, that's also a good way to do it.
So he's setting the example for his employees.
Setting the example. And I mean, what more can you say? The boss is doing it, and I'm not going to be there? And that's a message, by the way. When I came back to my chapter, they asked if I would be the attendance committee chairman. Sure. I found out we had our president is a professor in the university, and so she was very interested in knowing who was attending, so she has all the statistical data, who the names of the people were. She gave me this diskette with all these names on it, and so we did a little program at the end of the year and found out that 57% of the people that attended our chapter meetings that year were not members. Not members. Furthermore, we went down to find out where they worked. Got a nice list of companies where these people worked. So now what we're doing is we're setting up a little program. I am writing them a personal letter as an employer, wondering why. Oh, no, I'm not going to put it that way. I'm going to ask them, what do you do to encourage people to work in this society? And a few pointed questions like that. And then I'm going to challenge them at the end and see what happens.
Sounds like a good concept.
I don't know. I mean, I just think that it's the same philosophy that people, you don't have it because you didn't ask for it, right? So we're going to see what happens.
Right, so you're going to ask them all to become members.
Yes, and these people, I mean, I gave all that information to the membership chairman. So we'll see what happens.
Right. That's good. Now, since 1993, what have you been doing with the society? I'm sure as soon as your term was over as president, all of a sudden you didn't just fade into the woodwork. I'm sure they're on other committees and things.
Well, the society has a plan for the has-beens. First of all, they put you on the nominating committee as the vice chairman, and then as just a member on the long-range planning committee. So there's two committees you go on automatically. That was my first experience on nominating committee, and this year it's my second year out, so I was the chairman of the nominating committee, and I was so impressed on how the society picks its leaders. In fact, I don't know how I ever made it. I mean, the process is so thorough and so detailed that I am very impressed with it. And I think that's probably the reason why the society has maintained its status this 100 years. And long-range planning, when I first went on that committee, I thought, oh, gee, this is going to be dull. You know, I mean, the future, and I mean, we got so much to do right now. I mean, this thinking of the future business and trying to figure out what we're going to be doing 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It was the first thing I was exposed to was a survey that was done by, what was it, Kerr, this
And
membership.
it was an outside
yeah,
agency,
we
yes.
hired this company and they did this membership. The results we got from that were unbelievable. And so my first exposure was listening to this 2-hour presentation on all this data that they had collected. I was overwhelmed. Things I was overwhelmed with is that as a society, we have one of the highest satisfaction level of any members, of all the members. More ASHRAE members are happy with ASHRAE than any other technical society.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah, and the things that were wrong, some of the things were things that we knew were wrong, but just didn't know, and still don't know, how to fix them. But we were aware of. So I thought it was an enforcement on one end, but I was surprised at the satisfaction rate.
I think going back to both your survey as well as the nominating committee, that society really is a grassroots organization.
Absolutely.
Where the chapters feed up to the regions have nominating committees to nominate people for various offices in society, and that all feeds back up to the top.
That's right. The one thing that many of our ASHRAE people don't realize is that ASHRAE is the individual. It's not Atlanta. It's not the officers. I mean, they're a part of it, but it's the grassroots. And I just came back from, Don Rich and I started a program. When I was president, the overseas chapter were in a limbo. They were going to be assigned to Region 10, but it was like an off-year type of thing where they had missed the cycle. They weren't going to be able to go to that meeting, so they were going to miss coming to a CRC. So I took Don Rich, who was the president immediately before me, and we made a trip to each one of the chapters overseas and put on a one-day workshop on chapters. And we sent them a list of all the material we could cover and asked them to specifically check off the things that they would be interested in. The response we had from that trip was a real eye-opener, because it was sharing again. We presented and we listened to what they were telling us. This last 2 weeks ago, we just came back from Hong Kong, Bangkok, and Singapore. And the purpose of going was that the Far East, or I should say the chapters in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur put on themselves a Far East conference on the built, designing for, what was the words for it? Designing in the hot, humid climate for the built environment. 3-day conference. 2-day was technical engineering like we do in our ASHRAE. 3rd day was health-oriented. Nothing but doctors and research people talking about IAQ. I was so impressed with the quality of the conference, the papers that were presented, 70 papers presented in 3 days. But more impressed was the talking to these people after the conference was over and getting their viewpoints on where they feel they are. Singapore's been an overseas chapter now for 13 years, and they're concerned about how they can be more involved in the society. They've gone to regional meetings now. They found out what it's like to come forth with motions and have those motions acted on, and see those motions go forward and see them become, many of them become part of our society. They're so impressed with this democratic process, and they're so excited, and now the question is, what are we going to do? How are we going to get these people more involved? But that's the part where I see that we have great potential. We are recognized as the world's leader. We surveyed overseas people and asked them how they felt about the American society of heating ventilating, refrigerating engineers, and whether we should change the name to something else other than American. Their unanimous response was, we joined because we wanted to be part of the American society, not the international society or something else, which surprised me a little bit. But we have gained that prominence of being the leader, that the name is not really an issue with them. And that impressed me. And that's what we've been doing. 2 years ago, our president was asked to come to South Africa to visit one of our, what we call associate societies, CIREC, and they were going to have a conference. He was unable to make it, so they asked me if I would come. And naturally I said yes. And when I was there, the conference again was just, it was great. Great papers, well done. They had a mini trade show, super job. Then they asked me if I'd be willing to travel through South Africa to visit other cities and meet with our ASHRAE members at their expense. I mean, they paid for all of this. I mean, I said to myself, first of all, and they told me point blank, they says, we felt such an honor that you would come all this distance to meet with us, that we would just like to share you with other people. And so I was able to go to Cape Town and meet with about 50 of our ASHRAE members there, and up to Johannesburg and meet with another 50 or so there. And it was just the enthusiasm that you see in these people. They've been ASHRAE members, many of them for years. They've never been to a society meeting. They've never even met another ASHRAE person, maybe outside of their country. And you think about this and you say, that's pretty good. One of my meetings, meeting with a group called REVA, which is the umbrella organization for the refrigeration, air conditioning, heating in Europe. I think they have about 18 member groups, which they are the umbrella for. And we were meeting, and one of the men stood up and took me by surprise, because he said, I have been an ASHRAE member for many years. I'm also a member of this group and that group and other groups. He says, ASHRAE is the only society that I belong to that gives me something for my money. I get monthly magazines. I get a magazine and a newsletter. I get a yearly publication, a handbook. I have access to all kinds of technical data, standards, publications at a reasonable price. And he couldn't say enough. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, and yet he's never been to a chapter meeting, a regional meeting, a society meeting, a technical conference, and he thinks he's getting all the benefits. And here we are sitting here in our country, we have so much that we offer and that people do not take, our own members do not take advantage of.
It's a shame more of our members don't take advantage of that.
That's right.
You're right.
All I say is that that's their loss, but how can you get that message across?
That's true. That's true. Any other items you'd like to discuss today?
Well, one thing, when I was thinking of the different things that happened in my year, I had been told when I was a vice president and being considered for, I guess I was treasurer already, so I knew I had a chance that I could become the society president. And I'd always been told of the power of the office of president, that he basically can do anything, and that many times he did do anything. I mean, he would just take what was going along here at one direction and change the direction completely. That bothered me, because I figured that if we had a society that had goals and that we had objectives that we were trying to reach, you're not going to do this if you keep deviating all the time. So I came up with this idea, and I sent a letter, a question survey type, to past presidents. Found out there was 25 immediate past presidents that were still involved in ASHRAE. And so I sent them a letter and I asked them to answer these questions for me. And I gave room on the form just to do it so it wouldn't have to be any extra effort on their part. I said, what was your greatest accomplishment? What one item did you want to do but did not see accomplished during your term? What should ASHRAE be doing specifically? Any one item that you think we should be doing right now that we're not doing? And then what general area do you think we should maybe be working in that we're not working now or we're not involved in right now? Then lastly, I asked them what committee that they felt they could function in and be of value to the society, or what their interest was. Ultimately I got back 25 responses. No, I got back 24 because one passed away. And I was really impressed when I made a tally of all of their answers, of how closely and how they just flowed along. There wasn't this big deviations. There were some minor, there'd be some tilts, maybe a little more emphasis one direction or another. But it was just the flowing all the way through. When you looked at their themes year by year, they were complementary. They just kept building on it. And that impressed me. And some of I made a tally of what they felt that the single items we should be working in and the overall areas we should be working in. And it developed some pretty good ideas of a consensus of where the society could be. I was so surprised to find out that's exactly where we were going. And that really helped me. It helped me to understand the overall picture, some idea of what these people experienced and what they felt we should be doing, because I really valued their input. And during my presidency, I sought their advice 2 or 3 times about issues that were coming up. One of them was that we created this new publication during my year. I had the opportunity of appointing Raymond Cohen as the editor and the panel, and off they went. And I was so impressed when I finally saw the first publications this year. The International Journal of Heating, Ventilating, Air Conditioning, and Refrigeration Research. And that's something that I've always felt very strongly about, because we've had so many people object to some of the articles that we would have in the ASHRAE Journal. They say they're far too technical. You know, they're research quality. We need to have more articles in the journal that'll be of the how to do it, and more of the practitioner type articles than the research oriented. So I was very, very thrilled to see that happen. And I'm even more thrilled to know that we have 800 people subscribing to it, and that the 2 issues that have come out have just been great. And the idea of this research journal is that the material in it will be archival material. It's the kind of papers that you can go back and look at and say, hey, what did they say here? And it'll be timeless, which I think is great. What else? That's basically, I said this to people, and I can say it again, that during my year of presidency, it was everything that I imagined and more. The places that we were able to go and the people we met. I didn't do like Fred Kolos did, he visited, I think, 63 chapters during his year. I think I made a total of 20. And I tried to set some criteria, like if you had a special event coming up, or if you had not had a president ever, or if you had not had one in 5 years, that you would get priority. And the requests I got were 75th anniversaries and 50th anniversaries And then I would go to a few others that were in the area where I was going to be, and I could make them. But every place I went, I found the same thing. People who were devoted to this industry, and they were deriving some livelihood from it, right? They were either salespeople, they were research people, they were contractors, they were designers, engineers, maintenance people, you name it. But somehow they had a connection to this industry, and they were involved in a society called ASHRAE because they saw the benefit of putting something back into it and getting so much more out of it. And that impressed me.
Well, thank you very much. On behalf of the Historical Committee, I'd like to thank you for spending this afternoon with us.
Great. I've enjoyed it very much. And hope that sometime in the next years we'll be able to see more. I don't plan on being around for the next 50th celebration. They keep talking about our ASHRAE's 150th years, but posterity will have that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.